This is LibreQuest. My name is Matt. It is the 15th of October, 2019. The first article that I have today is from dot.kde.org. That's dot.kde.org. This was submitted by Paul. KDE launches the new version of its acclaimed desktop environment, Plasma 5.17. Plasma 5.17 is the new version where the desktop anticipates your needs. Among many new features and improvements, your desktop now starts up faster. Night Color, the color grading system that relaxes your eyes when the sun sets, has landed for X11. Your Plasma desktop recognizes when you are giving a presentation and stops messages popping up in the middle of your slideshow. And if you're using Wayland, Plasma now comes with fractional scaling, which means that you can adjust the size of all your desktop elements, windows, fonts, and panels perfectly to your high DPI monitor. The best part, the hundreds of improvements that have made their way into Plasma 5.17 do not tax your hardware. Plasma 5.17 is lightweight and thrifty with resources as ever. The next article is from news.softpedia.com. This is posted by Marius Nestor on the 15th of October. Linux kernel 5.2 reached end of life. Users urged to upgrade to Linux kernel 5.3. Greg Crowe-Hartman, a renowned Linux kernel developer, recently announced that the Linux 5.2 kernel series has reached end of life and that users must now upgrade to Linux kernel 5.3. Released in early July 2019, the Linux 5.2 kernel series brought various new features and enhancements, among which we can mention an open source firmware to support DSP audio devices, support for case-sensitive names in the ext4 file system, a new file system mount API, better resource monitoring for Android devices, as well as new open source GPU drivers for ARM Mali devices. Additionally, Linux kernel 5.2 introduced some performance improvements to the BFQ I/O scheduler, a new CPU bug infrastructure that better protects your computers against the recently disclosed Intel MDS, that's the microarchitectural data sampling hardware, vulnerabilities, and a new device mapper Dust target for simulating devices with failing sector and read failures. But as all good things must come to an end, the Linux kernel 5.2 has now reached the end of life with the 5.2.21 maintenance update released by Greg Crowe-Hartman last week. Therefore, users are now urged to update their Linux systems to a more recent Linux kernel series, specifically Linux kernel 5.3. So that is important news. And today, the podcast is about making your own custom power switch. Now, when I say making your own custom power switch, that might sound kind of weird, but I'm talking about literally a piece of hardware. Basically, it plugs into your motherboard in the power switch header on your motherboard, and it goes to an actual physical switch. So that's what I'm talking about. So now, when I've had to make these, and I make them sometimes, I don't make them all the time, I made one for a computer that didn't have a case. Now, you might need to make one for a computer where you're fabricating a custom case. That would be one situation where you would need to make something. And another situation, I bought a Thermaltake case. Now, I was putting a liquid-cooled CPU in the case, and I was also putting a liquid-cooled GPU in the case. Now, the front of the case blocked a lot of the airflow for the GPU radiator, so I actually removed that front panel, including all the front I/O, and I didn't use it on the case at all. And if you're watching the video version, it is this system right back here over my right shoulder that I'm talking about. That front panel is not there, and I have a switch installed on the front of the case there. I just push that switch in there, and it is a normally open momentary switch, which is the standard on systems these days. But I did make some video. Oh, another situation where you might need a custom switch is maybe your switch has broken or it's no longer working, and in that case you would need to make one, or you could make one. I guess you can also buy them aftermarket. I just think it's easier to actually make them, and the supply list for this is fairly simple. It's wire. I use 28 AWG, and it's a connector. So I use the DuPont connector, and the DuPont connector, you don't have to have a kit. You can actually buy DuPont wires online and just cut and splice what you need of those and do it that way. Because I'm working with an AT on-off switch, which used to be the standard. It's no longer the standard, obviously, but because I'm working with that, I did have to use some quarter-inch female disconnects to actually connect to the prongs on the bottom of the AT switch. So that's just specific for what the example that I'm showing in the video version of the podcast. I'm also showing some clips of the materials that I'm using, which I'm using black AWG, 28 AWG wire, some black shrink tubing, and then some black PET braided wire sheathing. So now all these materials that I'm using, you can get in any color that you need. So if you're doing a custom build and you're making your own power switches or any other kind of wire related stuff, and you're doing everything custom that way, you can get all these materials in various different colors. So you're really not limited by just having a black shrink tubing or the braided PET sheathing either. Now, when I say the braided PET sheathing, that it's pretty common to see that these days. You'll see it on AIOs. You'll see it on power supply cables. It's just that it's that plastic. It's a plasticky like wire sheath. I don't know how to explain it really, but yeah, I don't know. I would highly recommend actually watching the video version of this podcast just to reference exactly what I'm talking about. But you might already know what I'm talking about. I'm just not sure that I'm communicating it properly. Either way, so yeah, that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. The materials that you need are pretty straightforward as well on what you need to actually make a custom power switch. And the reason that I like to use the braided sheath is because if you just have loose wires running around in there in your system or outside your system or however you're actually using a custom switch, those can get caught up with other cables or they can get snagged on something and ripped loose. And so it's always good to have some sort of sheath over those wires so that they're not getting all tangled up or getting in the way, and they're a lot more easier to manage. So, and I did the podcast today. It might be a little. I might sound a little off. I'm very, very tired, so that's just how my life goes, I guess. But I wanted to get this show done, and really the only reason that I wanted to do a podcast about it is because I had to actually make this switch. That case that I got, it's the old AT style case. It didn't come with a switch, so I had to buy one, and I was going to have to take that switch down to the motherboard. And the weird thing is, yeah, it's an on-off switch. So that's not the standard. That used to be the standard. I'm guessing the reason it changed is because people wanted to treat it like a light switch or any other kind of utility that you would plug in and use. Just turn it on and then turn it off when you're done with it. And I'm guessing what happened was a lot of data corruption, a lot of data loss and that sort of thing, because when people were done with their workday or whatever, they probably just turned their system off, and that was not the proper way to shut down a computer. So I'm sure that's why the new standard is the momentary switch, and the on-off switch is actually located on the back side of the power supply, if you even have one. Some proprietary manufacturers don't even include a power switch on the back of the unit, the power supply. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to talk about today. Is just making your own custom power switch. It's very simple to do. Just get some sheathing, shrink tubing, and whatever connectors you're going to use on either end of that cable to get it down to your motherboard. So I don't know. It was interesting to me. Give me some feedback. What did you think about this as a podcast topic? I think it might be useful to somebody. It may not be useful to anybody. I'm not really sure. Tomorrow I'm actually going to be talking about something that is hopefully has a wider interest that is more general as far as Linux and tinkering and that kind of thing. I'm going to be talking about just a series of projects that I've worked on since about 2012. I kind of got into it, but it has to do with a Raspberry Pi, so that might be a little more general. while I'm recording this podcast, I'm thinking, you know what, this is kind of, I don't know how useful of a topic this really is. But it might be. I don't know. Let me know. You can leave comments on the video version over on YouTube. You can leave comments on the LibreQuest forum at LibreQuest.org, and you can also just grab the audio podcast over at archive.org. But as always, thank you for listening. And yeah, if this was actually helpful information, please, that would be great if you would let me know. If it's not, I mean, please let me know that as well. But either way, I'll be back here tomorrow with with a new podcast about a Raspberry Pi project. And thank you for listening, and I'll see you then.